What am I? What are we anyways? What am I? What are we anyways? I'm here. Oh, and I see that you're here. Well, there's some groups from a lot of different places, a few from outside my country. It's good to have some ideas disseminating fairly widely. I hope you're interested. They're different. They're not I don't think they're your everyday garden variety kinds of ideas about what humanity is, what I am, what thinking is, what the world is about. Today, we're going to talk about the mechanization, specialization, monetization of thought and culture. We've examined some things that help mutate Homo sapiens into Homo abstractus and Homo, the word processor. Inner and outer speech, extended and embedded speech. The brain co-elaborated by environments. The stratification of gills and cultural determinants. The engineering of near-perfect analog simulators, resulting in Homo recreationis. I made up that word. I don't know if it's true Latin. And a few other startling superpowers. But there's more. Culture itself concatenates and produces results far greater than the sum of its parts. We examined aspects of culture as words and memes and knowledges. As human populations grew exponentially from the 15th century, slowly, to the 21st century, quicker and quicker, human culture terraformed physical environments, deforestation, large-scale mining, growth of cities, agriculturalization of earth, energy revolutions, fishing the seas, as you know, etc., and etc. Charles Mann, his wonderfully readable explications concerning the changes in almost every Earth biosphere before and after Columbus are required readings. Previous to modern times, pre-Renaissance, let's say, when populations were much smaller, economies local and tiny compared to today's standards, reading, writing rare for everyday blokes, health quite chancy for many generally, lives short, and pretty brutal compared to today. Most of life was locally lived, in the sense that it involved villages, neighbors, and small effects from the outside, far from what today might be called global influences. Pastoralists, nomads, hunter-gatherers, the unnameable, seemingly uncountable small villages throughout the world, Russia, Africa, Australia, North and South America, etc., had little contact with the larger clots of humanity living in cities, and very tiny cities by today's standards. These folk, like the innumerable little lives of animals everywhere, had no larger story. They lived and died pretty anonymously, like most humans up to the present. It was also true that ferocious outside forces, the Khans, or the emperors, or the czars, armies, and tax collectors, time and again destroyed large number of peasants, confiscated peasants' produce, pillaged, raped, and murdered almost at will. And there were plagues and occasional environmental catastrophes. But the life of the individual was small, unconnected, and isolated compared to later times, and largely unsung. Often enough, half-starved and desperate. Children's brains were most often not optimally fed. Hollywood idealizes and obfuscates, but that's its nature. The last 150 years have radically changed the lived environment of the average human denizen of old Terra. I'm ignoring history per se, wars, immigrations, dictators, and their ilk, and spotlighting the material environment of the mind. The explosive increase in population was important, leading to the continuing rapid flight to the cities of rural folk. Recently, China itself moved 350 million people into cities in 30 or 40 years. Also, the building of guilds that specialized in knowledges rapidly grew. Dialogue, persuasion, and meme sharing became much more effective at dense populations. Ideas and revolutions are intensified and quickened if communication is more extensive and rapid. Social conditioning intensified. Books, pamphlets, flyers, and newspapers became ubiquitous. Schooling becomes much more generally available for everyday people, though mostly for advanced European cultures until quite recently. Children are regimented by school and softened up for later regimentation as citizens. A hierarchy of education develops from the elementary to the most advanced bastions of higher education. Buildings proliferate, curricula proliferate, and teachers proliferate. Scientific labs and hospital labs proliferate. Chalkboards, pens, and eventually pencils and paper and erasers are available to us peasants. Industry proliferates. Machines proliferate, and the structure of time changes for average humans. The old hunter-gatherer and agriculturalist rhythms are replaced by work. Work differentiates itself into 100,000 guilds, constructors of 1,000 varieties, bricklayers and carpenters and ironworkers, bankers and scriveners of so many varieties, machine operators of so many varieties, journalists and politicians, and sellers and buyers of 100,000 varieties, priests and pastors, madams and whores, snake oil salespersons galore. The nuclear explosion-like effects on humanity of the industrial energy revolutions and then the specialization revolutions of the late 19th and 20th centuries are well chronicled. But the connection to the mechanization of thinking and implantation of knowledges, which burgeoned exactly contemporaneously and causatively, hard to know, is seldom understood and clearly articulated. We have a tendency to highlight what might be called the history of scientific geniuses. We've deified Newton and Einstein and the other truly brilliant boys, but miss a critical point. It is the scientific human knowledge canons themselves that are being worked on and perfected, not the individual. And it's the implementation of the scientific human knowledge canons in the lived life of the hundreds of millions, then billions of individuals that do the terraforming. What one individual unveils or unearths immediately becomes the canon for the entire world to cogitate. And the word instruments, the brain instrumentalities, and the machines are all co-evolving, co-creating each other. So much so that we can no longer reasonably understand a world not so constructed and not interjected into our minds the way it is. Old humans were much more persnickety, much less tractable, much less regimented and domesticated in many ways. Simple minds, I don't mean simpletons, simple minds, simpler bucolic lives, simple pulses of natural work by agriculturalists, the untrammeled freedoms of the hunter-gatherer. They had their difficulties, to be sure. I'm just pointing out differences. We modern humans are scarcely cognizant of the molds we're poured into. Man hasn't become all that civilized, but she has domesticated him or herself radically. We desperately needed to domesticate ourselves. Large populations call for supersensitive social skills, which must be absorbed, conditioned, and enforced. We have been monetized and incentivized and then well-fed. Culture has forced a lengthening of our attention spans, a sharpening of our ability to narrow focus, a suppression of feelings of boredom and ennui. We've engineered ourselves to be wedged into the great worldwide machine. And it happened as we looked away, happened unconsciously, as do all mega-cultural adaptations. A metaphor. A very high-resolution picture, more like a realistic cartoon rendering of the inside of the cell. There are hundreds, probably thousands, of remarkably diverse shaped organelles and active clumps of molecules or biological machines, all moving herky-jerky, centering around large splices of DNA and their designated organelles, ribosomes, transcriptases, polymerases, thousands of complex proteins working on the cell's intricate dance of life, and transporting life chemicals, modifying and controlling chemicals every which way in a near inscrutable dance of submission to the whole. It reminds me of society observed from outside. In culture, we humans are like the seemingly infinite types of protein and protein structures involved in the life of the cell culture. We do our action sequences unthinkingly, perseveratively, seemingly unrelated to other parts of the whole. We perform our action sequences perforce, as the whole continues doing whatever it's doing. The whole constructs us, specifically our minds in their milieus are constructed. Our culture niches us so perfectly that we think we are godlike free beings in control of and in charge of the universes we inhabit. The material changes to the places we live, plus the changes to the way we think, particularly the more and more organized implantation of knowledges, plus the profound changes to how we work, very long hours of strenuous and focused strivings, have resulted in a way of being transformation that happened gradually enough that we're scarcely cognizant that it has taken place, not to mention what its effects have been. Almost every aspect of our living, thinking being has been monetized and incentivized and organized into huge industrial complexes of effort and struggle. We are chosen to interject a specific knowledge into ourselves. All along, the culture prepares us to give our life's time to what it needs. We become willing cogs, no matter our adolescent rebellions. Just as the economy drives us humans inexorably, the great complexes of society drive us to find a place and perfect the canon of the specific trade we're inducted into. We humans spend much of our lifetime working for, thinking about, being surrounded by activities, experiences provided by all the modern great complexes. Complexes that we created, but complexes that in turn have created us. The individual finds a job to do in one of the many and vast fields available and spends the rest of his or her life perfecting or taking part in some aspect of that métier. Often, specific knowledge is necessary and implanted. Complex social nets formed or fabricated, and the thoughts that go through the individual's mind for the rest of their lives will be constrained drastically by the work that is being done. Plus, all these fields are emotionally value-laden. Entrance into the field demands compliance and commitment to many of the embedded values. Think of becoming a soldier, or a jailer, or a prostitute, or a surgeon. Just as student children live embedded in the context and content of the educational environment, we adults live in the context of our jobs and our job environments, which determine most of our thoughts during any typical day. Most modern jobs provide rather stylized contributions to complex systems and are extremely repetitive over long periods of time and restrictive and not particularly fulfilling for the individual. And self-esteem wise, this situation is difficult to admit to. In spite of idealization of work and effort at modern job tasks, we largely continually go over fairly standard thought patterns, process and solve small aspects of the larger schemes of institutional, structural processes. politics and social engineering have had to make work into a near godlike use of lifetime energy to keep us at it. And we need to tell ourselves somewhat highfalutin stories about the value of what we're doing to make ourselves feel good and worthwhile. Besides, to fall out of the workforce is almost literally unthinkable for us children of the system. I'd lose all my self-worth, wouldn't I? What would I do? Who would I be? Most of us become our work. Most of us become our work. Much of our thinking and a significant part of our feelings revolve around what we do for a living. And each of the major complexes spring from and are entangled in one or another of the prime drives of humanity. Some of the chief areas of enterprise that so many of us are involved in are the education industrial complex, child minding in its myriad guises, mind sculpting, citizen building, conformity inducing, implanting societal values, implanting knowledges. The famous military-industrial complex, aggression, hierarchy protection, property acquisition and protection, the ultimate controller, the military-industrial complex. The entertainment industrial complex, story fabrication, value reinforcing, gossip, societal meme generation, circuses for us mobs. The sexuality industrial complex, sex, lust, prostitution, pornography. The drugs and alcohol industrial complex, boredom relief, self-control relief, disinhibition, deadening sensitivities. The police and prison industrial complex, control of other people, caste protection, property protection, fear induction. The medical industrial complex, fear of dying, health optimality, worry assuaging. The social hookup industrial complex, a relatively new one in its modern forms, male-female social attachment, bars and nightclubs. The science industrial complex, the desire to ameliorate conditions, explain and control nature. The criminality industrial complex, the criminality industrial complex, myriad basic thug impulses, the mafias and cartels that run the world, the universal impulse toward quick riches, violence, increase in clan power. If we observe monkey-ape primates closely, we'll see aspects of the life of such creatures that are wonderfully analogous to ours. Sex and aggression and sociability and grooming and childbearing, etc., are surface obvious. Unconsciously, per our natures, we learn to create industries around all our sensory, perceptual, and material needs. As as population exploded after the 17th century, an individual who could suss out needs and desires in a field that would benefit humanity could acquire acclaim and or notoriety and great wealth. And were very highly attracted to, addicted to, concupiscent of acclaim and notoriety and wealth. Have you noticed? And as per industrialization of all domains of thought in the last 100 years, we've examined the bases of these industries, standardized and perfected the processes involved, and perforce monetized each aspect of production and distribution. The military-industrial complex, the granddaddy of them all. The warrior class ruled humanity for thousands of years, direct and indirect. Trillions of dollars, systems of systems for defense and or offense. Hundreds of millions under arms, hundreds of millions ready to systematically hack a neighbor when called. Gloried in prose and poetry and dogma, starting way back with the Aeneid and even the Bhagavad Gita. Get them young, wash their brains, send them out for our unending glory. We love them. The sexuality industrial complex, the world's oldest, well, tied with the first one above. Every bodily sense, and a few we've created from scratch, has its industrialized complex. Perfumes and deodorants for the armpits and noses, music for the ears, art for the eyes, massage and exercise for the body, etc., etc., etc. Prostitution and its debauched daughters. Pornography for the boys. Toys and dolls are needed. Drugs and alcohol are not optional. The hyper-specialization of knowledges and individuals specializing in profiting from them have spawned industry after industry, and each industry needs scientific business rationalization and perfecting. The criminality industrial complex and the police and prison industrial complexes feed off one another. The range of criminality has always been wide and deep and pervasive and persuasive. 10 to 15% of populations in peacetime are criminal, but many more engage in crime that is covert. Young men are natural-born criminals, but most of us, more or less, grow out of it. Much modern criminality has been industrialized also, from the worldwide drug, prostitution, protection cartels to the criminal bankers, arms salesmen, etc. And the street punk on the corner thinks he rules the roost. The scourge of corrupt and venal police in much of the world is mirrored by the scourge of prisons of many, many horrible descriptions through time. In significant ways, the police army enforcers have become almost invisible to the well-washed and educated middle classes. Yet they are the ultimate backstop, whether in authoritarian China or so tidy and well-disciplined Singapore, or in our dreams and nightmares. See the entertainment industrial complex. The news industrial complex, a subdivision of the entertainment industrial complex, has taken over a huge chunk of cerebral real estate this last century. Seldom recognized as a servicer of the perfectly primal need for security. I need to know what's happening, what could happen, where are the threats, who are the threats, and someone needs to tell me how to protect myself. Almost all of us are addicted to the news, servicing the security needing and gossip needing sectors of our brains. Watching the world titillated by accidents and other people's catastrophes, talking about what can go wrong. The gossip industrial complex, a subdivision of the news entertainment industries, providing us with delectable and universally desired tidbits of pleasurable knowledge about the rise and especially the fall of our neighbors far and wide. Watching other people's lives, seeing their troubles, talking about their stupidities, and therefore my smartness. Lusting after the pretty ones, the rich ones, the powerful and young and energetic ones. The celebrity industrial complex. The celebrity industrial complex. Don't get me started. The natural anxiety of the naked social ape, surrounded by so many other apes, has been ratcheted up to the stratosphere by our ability to see each and every atrocity we commit on each other day and night, which in turn triggers our anxiety lessening propensity to talk about what scares us again and again and once more again. It's a bit of a wonder that any of us ever leave our houses. But the consequences of the relatively new cycle of 24 hours of horror news are actually not a bit benign and possibly quite seriously deleterious. Preoccupation with and constant retelling of horror stories from all around the world is a now well-established global neurosis. By naming just a few typical examples of these complexes, we see, how all major aspects of our human nature and need structures have been mechanized. Then we, as we moderns do, they are human needs and propensities and pleasures minutely studied, analyzed, and perfected, and then inevitably monetized in myriad ways. Artificial intelligences now watch us greedily, hypersensitive to our faintest need or desire, throwing the subtlest suggestion up before our unsuspecting eyes, titillating us with needs we scarcely know we possess, smarter than us, knowing what we need before our brain does. Monetization is another book in itself. The rise of money, the incentivizing of human behaviors, the universal modern addiction to filthy lucre, the wildfire spread of industry and the money economy, burning to cinders all other cultures and economic systems. Money, such a perfect example of an abstract, contingently created thing. Money harnesses our want-need impulses massively, entrains the life anxiety systems, and therefore gooses the primordial brainstem survival resonances and signals power and sexual survival prowess, and signals surfeit of food and clothing and all the delicacies we've conditioned ourselves to lust after. If our work environment gives rise to much of our thinking being, and our environment is almost exclusively constructed by one or another complex that has arisen and superpowered itself into the cultural field, and if the entertainment industrial complexes, dream purveyors extraordinaire, occupy most of our non-working mental real estate, looking dispassionately, we have a comprehensive view of who we really are deep down. A few more thoughts. As we've seen in a number of areas in this tome, we humans live in storyland. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves are myriad and multi-leveled. The clan has always told itself self-justifying and self-aggrandizing lullabies. Often, clan delusions prepare societies for genocides. Clan anxieties power frenzies of every kind. Nightmare contagions and group manias are standard, and in modern times, verging on instantaneous. Once inner speech extended to outer speech, mind contagion was inevitable. Homo sapiens are fantastic copycats of both the good and more drearily and balefully the bad. Us individuals need justifying stories for just about everything we do. We need self-esteem, and we need to feel valued, and we really, really need to be loved and cherished. We don't want to die and be extinguished. We want purpose and progress and pleasure and prosperity. We want to be in the right and on the right side of history. We cling to self-justifying stories ferociously and annihilate those who tear away the curtain behind which we hide. Thus has it ever been. Thus has it ever been. Because we have such fragmented thought structures, remember, standard associative thinking, and because our knowledge about ourselves is actually a canon of clan-sanctioned stories, And because the modern psyche is constructed by story and takes place in imagined spaces, we don't observe the mind accurately. The sum of the above noted industrial complexes are created by culture through time, but industrial complexes co-create individuals tuned to the industrial complex's dynamics. Thoughts happen, they are marshaled by the internal, clan echo niche constrained, and external environments. Feelings arise, and drive thought, even as feelings are driven by thought. History is as history must be. History is as history must be.